Hello and welcome to the Bartholomew School GCSE English Literature Revision video focusing on how to answer the Shakespeare question for English Literature Paper 1. Before we start properly, you need to make sure you have in front of you your GCSE English Literature Revision booklet, a highlighter, a pen and also fairly obviously some lined paper. So before we go any further you might want to pause the video and gather those things. We're going to be focusing on practice question 1 from the Macbeth practice questions in your booklet. It's the one with the extract from Act 1, Scene 3. In an exam situation, the first thing that you need to do is look closely at the question. So let's do that now with a highlighter. The first thing to notice is the phrase starting with this extract. This tells us that we need to analyse the printed extract, but also that it is only a starting point. Next, notice that the question uses the word how. This tells us we need to focus our answer on the techniques and methods that Shakespeare uses. Thirdly, the subject of our answer needs to be good and evil. So this should stop us from writing everything we know about the play and tells us that we need to be paying attention to ideas about good and evil in the extract and the play as a whole. We should also notice how many times the question uses Shakespeare's name. This tells us that we need to be writing about the play as a piece of literature, not about the characters as though they are real people. Lastly, as we've already mentioned, we need to write about both the extract and about the play as a whole. So let's turn now to the extract. I'm going to read it aloud and you need to follow, and with your highlighter you should pick out words, phrases and techniques that you think you could say something interesting about. Remember that the focus of the question is ideas about good and evil. In this extract from Act 1, Scene 3, Macbeth reflects on the witch's prophecy. So this is just after he's been told by Ross that he has been appointed Thane of Cawdor. Two truths are told as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme. I thank you, gentlemen. This supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. If ill, why hath it given me earnest of success commencing in a truth? I am Thane of Cawdor. If good, why do I yield to that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair, and make my seated heart knock at my ribs against the use of nature? Present fears are less than horrible imaginings. My thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man, that function is smothered in surmise, and nothing is but what is not. And then Banquo says, look how our partner's wrapped. And Macbeth, again in an aside, if chance will have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir. So what could we have picked out? Well, I might have highlighted the phrase happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme, because those three adjectives, happy, swelling and imperial, tell us that Macbeth's first reaction is to be delighted by what the witches have told him, even though he realises it is potentially evil. I can also write about structure here because this is right at the start of the play and it's Macbeth's first response to the prophecies, so I can say some interesting things about what this tells us about Macbeth's nature. I might also have pulled out that repeated phrase structure, cannot be ill, cannot be good, because this tells me something about Macbeth's temptation, but also about his uncertainty. I might have highlighted the evidence that Macbeth's thoughts are already turning to evil and murder. Phrases like horrid image and unfix my hair could be good evidence for this, although there are others in this speech too. I could also have picked out the evidence that Macbeth is somehow already under the influence of the witches and therefore under the influence of evil. He says that he yields to a horrid suggestion as though he's giving in to it reluctantly, and Banquo says that he is rapt, which means that he's almost in a trance imagining the imperial theme that the witches have told him about. You might have highlighted other things too, and that's completely fine, as long as you can write interestingly about those quotations. But you'll remember that this question doesn't just ask you about the extract, it also asks you about the rest of the play. So I'd suggest that a good way of planning your ideas is to put them down in a table, a bit like this. I want to plan 3 or 4 really good analytical paragraphs using the ideas I've taken from the passage. So I had my quotation, happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme, and my idea that answers a question about good and evil could be something like, Shakespeare suggests that Macbeth's evil comes from his driving ambition. My second quotation, cannot be ill, cannot be good, might lead me to make the point that although Macbeth's thoughts immediately turn to murder, Shakespeare suggests that he is not yet evil because he is still uncertain about what to do. To build on this, my quotation's horrid image and unfix my hair might suggest that Macbeth is actually horrified by evil. And then lastly, I might use my evidence of Macbeth being transfixed by the prophecy to make the point that Shakespeare makes it possible to interpret that the supernatural is the cause of Macbeth's evil, not his own nature. So once I've prepared what I'll say about the passage, I need to think about the rest of the play. This is another good opportunity to think about structure, so I'm also going to keep in mind how the ideas about good and evil might change or develop as the play continues. For each point that I've made, I'll now try to think of a linked passage or quotation to develop my idea. So thinking about Macbeth's driving ambition, I might consider linking to Macbeth's insatiable fears about his own position. Even when he is king, he continues to commit evil because he's afraid of Banquo. I might use one or both of these quotations here. I might develop my ideas about Macbeth not being entirely evil by considering Act 1, Scene 7, where he tells Lady Macbeth, "We will proceed no further in this business." Even after he seems to have made up his mind, Macbeth is not bent on evil and continues to wrestle with his conscience, so I could also have used the dagger scene here. There's plenty that I could say about Macbeth being horrified by evil, because he's tormented in lots of moments throughout the play. So I've chosen a quotation here from Act 3 with plenty of imagery to analyse. And then lastly, I'll look at the idea that Macbeth is influenced by the witches by using his first line, which suggests that he is under their evil power before he's even met them, because he uses the same phrasing, foul and fair, as they do in Act 1, Scene 1. I also need to link, obviously, to context in my answer, so my last bit of planning is going to be to make some notes about the kind of context I could write about. For the exploration of ambition, I might mention the Jacobean ideas about good in the sense of good kingship. Macbeth being caught between good and evil will allow me to write about the contextual reasons he fears committing regicide, like the divine right of kings or Jacobean religious beliefs. I could write about ideas about heaven and hell and damnation to develop my understanding of why Macbeth is horrified and tormented by evil. And to develop my sense of why it is so terrible Macbeth is influenced by the supernatural, I might write about Jacobean anxieties about witchcraft and what it would mean to have a king under the influence of the supernatural. So you can see there that we have the backbone of 4 paragraphs. You might not necessarily write them in this order, and if you're aiming for a level 6 or above, you would definitely want to have a sense of argument with a brief introduction and conclusion with your interpretation, and that might cause you to reorder these points. Let's have a look at what one paragraph would look like written up into an essay format. So I'm going to read this to you. In the extract and the play as a whole, Shakespeare presents Macbeth's evil acts as being motivated by his driving ambition. In the extract we see that Macbeth's immediate response to finding out that he is Thane of Cawdor after the witch's prophecy is greedily optimistic. He describes the true truths that he is Thane of both Glamis and Cawdor as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme. Those adjectives happy, swelling and imperial become more impressive as the sentence progresses, and it is important that the final adjective is imperial because this has connotations of kingship and empire. The adjective swelling, too, suggests that Macbeth is not contented, because it implies that he expects his success to continue to grow. In this quotation, Shakespeare also uses imagery of performance in the nouns prologues and act, which might perhaps foreshadow the performance and deception that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth will soon carry out. Later in the play, we see this idea of swelling ambition, as Macbeth is never satisfied with what he achieves. Once he is king, in Act 3, he says that to be thus is nothing, and the lexical choice nothing implies how little he has gained by committing regicide. He says that our fears in Banquo stick deep. Even though he is using the royal pronoun our now, he is still deeply insecure and still ambitious. This leads him to commit further evil in the murders of Banquo and later Lady Macbeth and her children. In the Jacobean era, it was believed that the king had an important moral role to lead his people. Macbeth's personal ambition and his capacity for evil are made all the worse because he is supposed to be God's representative king on earth. Shakespeare therefore presents Macbeth's ambition as all the more dangerously evil because once he is king, it affects him, not just him, but his kingdom too. So you can see in this paragraph that I've given a response to the question in my first sentence. I've then analysed the quotation from the extract in detail. I've linked this to elsewhere in the play, where I have also analysed in detail. I've then developed my point through contextual reference, and I've finished off my paragraph with a link back to the question. This answer should take you 55 minutes to write, so you can look back at any part of this video to help you with the planning, and you can use your revision booklet to remind you what you're being marked on. So have a go now at writing your response, and then when you finish you can hand it to your teacher for some feedback. Then you can try any of the other questions in the booklet using exactly the same method, and you can use the video a second time. Thank you very much for watching, and good luck with your response.